There is a particular kind of loneliness that begins in childhood. It doesn't announce itself with tears or tantrums. It settles quietly, like dust on a windowsill, while the world outside continues to move. It's the loneliness of a child who speaks but is not heard, who feels but is not seen, who reaches out only to find that the hands meant to catch them were never really there. This is not about neglect in the traditional sense. It's subtler than that. It's about a child whose inner world, rich, complex, and tender, was met with misunderstanding, whose emotions were dismissed as too much or too little, whose questions were answered with distraction, whose silence was mistaken for contentment. And so, the child learned to become invisible, not in body, but in truth. This is the psychology of that child, and perhaps, if you listen closely, you will recognize the echo of their voice in your own. A child comes home from school, chest tight with something they cannot name. They sit at the dinner table, waiting for someone to ask. But the question never comes, or it does, and the answer they give is met with a glance, a nod, a redirection to something more urgent, more practical, more easy to manage. The child learns quickly, not through punishment, but through absence. The absence of curiosity, the absence of reflection, the absence of a mirror that says, I see you, I feel you, you make sense. And so they begin to withdraw, not dramatically, not with rebellion. They simply stop offering the tender parts of themselves, the dreams, the fears, the strange and sacred thoughts that live in the margins of the young mind. They tuck them away, somewhere deep and quiet, where they will not be misunderstood again. This is not a conscious decision. It is a survival instinct dressed as maturity. The world calls them easy. Teachers say they are well behaved. Parents feel relief. But beneath that calm surface, something fundamental is happening. The child is learning that their inner life is not welcome in the outer world. That to be loved, they must be simple, manageable, small. And so they become smaller. They laugh when others laugh. They stay silent when silence is expected. They perform the shape of childhood without ever fully inhabiting it. And no one notices. Because from the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, a loneliness is taking root, one that will follow them long after childhood ends. What a child needs is not complicated. They need to be met, not fixed, not corrected, not managed, but met in their confusion, in their sadness, in the raw, unpolished moments when they do not yet have the words for what they feel. They need a witness, someone who sits beside them and says, without fear or hurry, tell me more. But often they receive something else. They receive care in the form of solutions. Food, shelter, discipline, structure, all necessary, yes, but not sufficient, because a child can be fed and still feel hollow. They can be safe and still feel unseen. The parents or caregivers may have loved them deeply. This is not a story of villains. It is a story of misalignment, of adults who were themselves never taught the language of emotional attunement, who learned to survive by not feeling too much, and so could not teach their children to feel safely. When the child expressed big emotions, fear, anger, grief, they were often met with discomfort. You're fine. Don't be dramatic. It's not that serious. Not out of cruelty, but out of helplessness. The adults did not know how to hold what the child was offering, and so they minimized it instead. The child internalized a message. Your feelings are too much. Your inner world is inconvenient. And so they stopped sharing it. They learned to smile when asked how they were, to say good, even when they were crumbling, to carry their emotional life in secret, like a language no one else spoke. And the distance grew, not between them and their caregivers only, but between them and themselves. The brain of a child is not a small adult brain. It is something else entirely, a landscape under construction, wiring itself based on the emotional environment it inhabits. When a child is consistently understood, when their emotions are named, reflected, and held, they develop what psychologists call secure attachment. They learn that their inner world is trustworthy, that feelings, however uncomfortable, are not dangerous. That connection is possible, even in distress. But when understanding is absent, something different occurs. The child's developing nervous system learns to expect disconnection. Their brain begins to associate vulnerability with rejection. The prefrontal cortex, which governs emotional regulation, struggles to mature properly because it was never modeled how to process big feelings in relationship with another. This is not abstract, it is biological. Studies in developmental psychology show that children who feel chronically misunderstood often develop what is called anxious or avoidant attachment. They grow into adults who either cling desperately to relationships, terrified of abandonment, or push people away before they can be hurt again. They struggle to identify their own emotions, a phenomenon known as alexithymia. Not because they don't feel, but because no one ever helped them translate feeling into language. And perhaps most painfully, they lose trust in their own perceptions. When a child says, "I'm scared," and is told, "No, you're not," the message is clear. Your reality is not real. Over time, they stop believing themselves. They second-guess their instincts. They ask others how they should feel because their internal compass was never validated. This is the invisible architecture of being misunderstood. It does not bruise the skin, but it fractures the sense of self. By the time they reach adulthood, the child who was never understood has become two people. There is the one the world sees, competent, independent, perhaps even successful. Someone who has learned to function without needing much from others, who prides themselves on self-sufficiency, on not being a burden. And then there is the one beneath, the one who still aches to be known. This is the wall. On one side, the longing, the deep, relentless hunger to be seen fully and still chosen to share the hidden parts, the messy ones, the uncertain ones, and not be met with discomfort or distance. On the other side, the terror, the bone-deep belief that if they show too much, they will be too much. That vulnerability is not a bridge, but a trapdoor. And so they oscillate, they withdraw, building walls so high that no one can hurt them. Then they resent the loneliness those walls create. They open up, tentatively, carefully, and the moment they sense even a flicker of misunderstanding, they retreat again, convinced they were right to never try. They want intimacy, but fear it equally. They crave depth, but have no map for it. In relationships, they are both hungry and guarded. They test people without meaning to. They wait to be understood without ever fully explaining themselves, because part of them believes that if they have to explain, it doesn't count. Real love, they think, would just know. But that is the logic of a child who was never met, who is still waiting for someone to notice what was never said. The adult knows better, but the wound does not. There is no single moment when everything changes, but there are moments when something loosens. When the old story, the one that says you are too much, you are not enough, you are the problem, begins to crack. It might happen in therapy, or in a conversation with someone who listens without fixing, or in the middle of the night, alone, when the silence finally becomes bearable enough to hear what has always been there. The realization is quiet, but it is seismic. I was not the problem. I was simply never met. This is not blame. It is clarity. It is the moment the adult stops abandoning the child within and starts turning toward them. Instead, stops dismissing their own feelings as irrational and starts asking, "What were you trying to tell me?" It is the moment they see, perhaps for the first time, that their sensitivity was not weakness, that their need for understanding was not neediness, that they were not broken. They were simply a child trying to survive an environment that could not hold them. And in that recognition, something shifts. Not a healing, not yet, but a softening. The war within begins to quiet, because the adult is no longer on the side of misunderstanding. They are learning, slowly, to become the witness the child never had. They are learning that it is never too late to be understood, even if the one who finally understands them is themselves. Healing is not about finding the perfect person who will finally understand you. It is about becoming fluent in your own language. This is the work that comes after the realization. It is slower, less dramatic, but it is the work that changes everything. It begins with the small, sacred practice of paying attention. When an emotion rises, anxiety, sadness, anger, the adult who was once a misunderstood child learns to pause, not to push it away, not to judge it, but to ask, what is this? What does it need? They begin to name their feelings, even when it feels clumsy, especially when it feels clumsy, because naming is how we make the invisible visible. They learn to validate themselves, to say, it makes sense that I feel this way, even when no one else would understand, to stop waiting for external permission to feel what they feel. They practice speaking their truth in relationships, not perfectly, not without fear, but with a quiet commitment to being known. And when they are misunderstood, they do not collapse. They do not retreat into the old belief that they are unlovable. They breathe, they try again, or they let it be, because they are no longer seeking someone to complete them. They are learning to companion themselves. This is reparenting, not in some abstract therapeutic sense, but in the most literal way. The adult becomes the caregiver the child never had, the one who listens, the one who believes, the one who says you are not too much, you never were. And slowly the inner child begins to trust again, not the world necessarily, but themselves. The child who was never understood does not disappear. They do not heal and then vanish into the past, a chapter closed, a wound forgotten. They remain quiet, watchful, still tender in the places where they were once hurt. But now they are not alone. Now they live inside an adult who has learned to turn toward them instead of away, who no longer sees their sensitivity as a flaw, but as a kind of courage, who knows that the longing to be understood is not childish, it is human. There will still be days when the old loneliness returns, when a conversation falls flat, when a feeling goes unmet, when the world once again seems like a place where you must translate yourself into something smaller to be accepted. But now there is a difference. Now you know how to come home to yourself. You know that being misunderstood by others does not mean you are incomprehensible. It means you are deep, layered, worth the patience it takes to truly know someone. And perhaps most importantly, you know that the child you once were, the one who sat quietly at that dinner table, waiting to be asked, waiting to be seen, they were never the problem. They were just a child who needed to be met. And now, finally, they are, not by the world, not by the people who could not see them then, but by you. And that, in the end, is enough.